Hey, Donnie.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Kathy. How you doing?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here for me. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So did you get my email with kind of explaining the situation and my thoughts on it?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm feeling like I can't just do my business because the board is so confused on how I spend
Yeah, sure.
money, and it seems like they think I'm not supposed to spend or take in any money until till they figure it out. And I want to just keep doing my business. So I'm feeling kind of,
Yeah. Are the board joining us for our call today?
no, I'm recording it. Nobody could come. So I'm recording it
I
and they
see.
can hear it if they want, or I'll give them a summary. So
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, how about how about unless you had anything in particular you wanted to start with, I can just outline what I see as the situation and the issues that they're raising that are valid, and then the other considerations that are valid from another perspective in terms of where you're perhaps coming from. Would that work?
yeah, yeah, terrific.
Yeah, and I should just say I'm not a lawyer, so
Right.
everything I say here isn't legal advice, but I'm drawing on my understanding of the law, and as I mentioned, David Atkin is real space, and he does have a report here that I've got. I don't know if it's accessible online. I'll try to take a quick look. It's actually something he prepared for the Nonprofit Association for Oregon. Let me see. The name of it is it's actually called Governing an Ethical and Transparent Organization, and he goes into the two areas that are really of consideration here. The first relates to what's called private inurement, and the second relates to what's called private benefit. So, the first thing to say is if you have a nonprofit, in general, if you have a nonprofit organization and the focus is on achieving a social mission, right? In this case, for example, empowerment of women. Let's just keep it very broad for the moment. And you have a board that oversees the processes involved with managing a budget. So, for example, you might put together a very simple budget that the board reviews and approves nominally, and then maybe touches base on with every 3 months when they meet, let's say, to when there's a financial update to just see how's it going. If in that budget you have something along the lines of, okay, we're anticipating $10,000 of income this year. That income is going to come largely through grants, donations, and maybe some workshop fees, let's say. Um, and your primary activity for the empowerment is to run training programs, let's say. And your expenses are to hire the trainer. In that case, it might be yourself. It might be someone else who comes in for bits and pieces. It might be a combination. And your other main expense is education, professional development that relates to the ability to provide that service. Understanding is that generally speaking, that would be considered acceptable as long as the amount of training that is happening really is reasonable and necessary in order to deliver the programs, and as long as you are ensuring that the programs actually have a number of people attending them, it's helping people, etc. As compared to, let's say you had $10,000 come in, you used $9,000 for professional development and $1,000 to pay yourself, and then you had two people at the trainings. It would be questionable then who's actually really benefiting from this. Yeah. Now, the complication comes in when you have a private practice and your nonprofit work, and when there's any overlap between those two. So, if, for example, you are working as a life coach, let's say, or something in a private practice, and you then go into work under a nonprofit and you're doing things for the nonprofit as an employee or a contractor, um, there's the question then of okay, if you paid, I'm using extreme example here, 90% of your income went to, in let's say, even scholarship money that came in through a grant, went to paying for your training, or even to you as an individual, the training side of it being the private benefit, question mark, and the payment side of it in terms of paying you as an employee or a contractor to services being the private inurement side. So those two parts of it. If you are having a private practice, then the question becomes, is this nonprofit really about the employee getting that professional development using the nonprofit as the vehicle to make those gains, such that they can then, develop their private practice? Or is this really about the nonprofit fulfilling its mission and it being incidental, or non-substantial, that it just happens that someone's a practitioner separately and they keep it very private. They don't advertise that in any way, shape, or form through the nonprofit. At most, it might be in their biography that says they're a private practitioner. It doesn't link out to their website. In other words, there's no promotion happening. You're not using the nonprofit as a vehicle.
Can I take a
So,
question right now?
yeah.
It was my my impression or intention that whatever I did, my workshops and all that stuff, the money would go into the nonprofit, and it would be used to pay for training and expenses. And if we got enough income that I could start collecting a salary, then I would start collecting a salary. That was kind of how I envisioned it. So not as, but if I can't just go about doing my business as I do, it sounds like the board, what you're talking about, is much looser than the kind of the feel at the first meeting. But there was somebody in the meeting that was really in financial crisis herself and going through her own personal stuff and putting it out there into the, projecting it into our problems, right? And so my question is can I do that? Can I just run my business of doing workshops and doing trainings and doing any coaching, and the income that comes in from that go into the nonprofit and be used for further training, which is, the training is all directly related to what I'm doing. Is that right, or is that wrong?
Well, I'm a little confused, so let me clarify some things. When you say just run your business, do you mean as a sole proprietor?
No, I mean like, okay, the nonprofit came in, it was born in December, right? So from December, I collected all the, I collect all the expenses and incomes anyway for taxes before it was a nonprofit, right? So I brought all that to the table, and they said, well, you can't.
Wait, one second. When you say the income and the expenses, what was the income that you're talking about?
The income was a workshop, and it was not very much. It was like $100 or something. And then expenses, where it's all the materials, and plus I went to a training in December. So the airplane and the staying and the fees and all that. So it was, and there was the filing fees for the nonprofit and the consultation with you. So it was a real expensive month. Right. But the feel that the board seemed to have at that point was that that's before they met. So it's not part of, so I shouldn't expect it to be considered part of the income and outcome and part of the process. And then we haven't met. We're going to meet again on Saturday. So does that mean that this month in their mind didn't count? And so I'm just confused as far as how the finance is run.
Right. So two things. Firstly, the date of incorporation is important, but also whether or not you had what was called an unincorporated association beforehand. As in, if you had people come together before, like sometime last year, and say, okay, we're going to have this project, it's going to be a non-profit, and we agree to setting it up. So the first time you might have reached out to board members, for example, if you had anything documented about the creating this organization, then you were already what's called an unincorporated association. And at that point, you absolutely can be recording things that are contributing to the overall of the organization, that at some point you could get reimbursement for. It certainly helps if that happens after the date of incorporation, just in terms of being clean. But there's nothing stopping that, because, for example, your incorporation fees, like you said, your actual incorporation happens before you do your 501c3. So you might not ever get to the 501c3, and you might want your incorporation fee reimbursed. So that's totally reasonable as well. The reality is, there's nothing, as far as I know, in principle, and I'll talk about the exclusions in a second. In principle, there's nothing wrong with that reimbursement, and it's a case-by-case basis where it's more about the board's comfortability of how are you running this organization financially. So the reality is this: you've got $100 income and, let's say, $1,500 of expenses. The board is going to look at that and say, well, the organization has no money right now. It owes, if we agree to this, it owes $1,500 to someone, and it's got $100 in the bank, right? Just, talking about just given those numbers very specifically. In that case, the board can say, all right, Kathy, as the executive director, and we'll assist you in this, what's the budget for the year? How are we going to get the money to even reimburse you? Mm-hmm. At that point, you can say, here's my plan. I'd like to apply for these 3 grants. I'm looking to run these workshops on a paid basis. I'm hoping we can build some donors in this way, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. If the board then looks at that and says, okay, we'll give that a try, then all it is you're giving it a try. The reality then comes into play is whether or not you can generate that income. If, for example, you brought in $10,000, then according to your budget, as long as the board has seen a budget, reviewed it, said, yes, we approve that, and is meeting every 3 months to sort of have a look over the financials, then there's nothing illegal or unethical, as far as I'm aware, in principle. And again, I'll get to the exceptions in a second, of having all of those costs, including costs that were borne before the incorporation, as long as the intention for those activities was to create things for the nonprofit that was still in formation. There's nothing problematic with that, unless you have this private business on the side, and the training that you were doing, etc., is actively feeding that. That's where it gets problematic.
Yeah, well, I don't have that at all.
Then as far as I understand, with the limited knowledge of the things you've described to me, given I don't know the full extent of all of the things you're up to, but there's nothing wrong with that. And the way I would describe it to a board is, hey, I understand. Not many people want to start an organization in the red, right? To be sort of already indebted. Here's the reality. If this organization makes some money, those debts will, can be explored. Like, I would love for the board to agree to those liabilities being paid. If I can't raise money through this organization, then that money won't be paid back. It's as simple as that. There's no liability. There's no board members having to pay anything. There's not.
Yeah, I think that's what they're worried about. So I'm putting the money out, and it's okay. I'm the one taking the risk. It's no risk to them. Great.
Yeah. So, now the only thing you need to be aware of is you can't, and it's hopefully relatively clear already, but just to reiterate, you can't demand that certain things be paid for. All you can do is request it of the board.
Right.
Now, in future, you can get pre-approval. You can say, here's my budget, and so you don't have to worry about retrospectively getting a training, costs of training paid, paid for, etc. and that's the way, like I have it just as the executive director, today I got approached by the Rogue Valley Messenger about, advertising the offers and needs market. If I wanted, I could make that decision without board, of course. Or if I did that before the organization was set up, and the first thing I was doing was a launch of the Post Growth Institute, and I made a decision to advertise it and pay for advertising, I could approach the board and say, hey, will you retrospectively reimburse this? The important thing here is that the IRS looks at, and good boards will look at the costs associated with travel and say, were they reasonable? And they actually even have rates associated with like certain kind of hotels for this kind of thing. If you're staying at an event,
Uh-oh, you're frozen.
what's the amount that you should pay for that kind of thing? You can get, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah, so you can see those, if you Google nonprofit rates, I think it's like fringe benefits or nonprofit rates, hotel stays, you can find, I think, that list of materials. I believe it's online and accessible. So
I always go cheap, so that's not gonna. I didn't have state fence.
yeah.
Question though. Okay, so and here's the big question that's holding me back from continuing going on this. Do I have? You said make a budget, meet every 3 months. If I have an event coming up, I have to decide how I'm gonna promote it and do all those things. And am I gonna buy binders? And do I need board approval for all those specifics? Or
No.
okay.
I mean, no. And see, here's the thing. I mean, you can develop a policy at some point that says, I go to the board if it's a decision that's over $500, or, you can set a markup. But essentially what you want to do, and it can be simple, Kathy, is like 4 items for income and 5 line items for expenditures. The 4 line items for income are donations, grants, workshop fees, whatever, right? The expenses can be marketing, materials, payment of salaries or contractor fees, and web, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You then would want to just put out some numbers of what you're anticipating for each quarter and be able to justify it. Like, okay, $500 for workshop income for this quarter, for these 3 months, $100 for this 3 months, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because I'm doing 2 workshops here. I'm doing 1 workshop there. I'm applying for this grant here. It's a conversation. You have a conversation with your board. You give them a proposal, and then they ask questions, and it's their job to be. See, the truth is, it's good that you've actually got a board that has had these alarms go off. Why? Because that's 10 times better than a board that does nothing. So you can flip it and say, the way you respond using an asset-based approach is to say, I'm so glad you raised these flags. It really warms my heart that you're that vested in this organization. And it's also, and even if they're coming from a fear space, it's great that you have the caution associated with this, because that's exactly what it means to be a good board member, is to scrutinize, ask tough questions. We're on a learning journey together here. Let's see what we can learn. And the number one thing you need to reiterate in order to move forward, in my opinion, Kathy, is this. You are doing everything for a social good. You need to keep coming back to that. And as clear as that is at the moment to say it, so for the empowerment of women, or whatever that mission was that you came up with in our session together. And so if you can say all of the expenses that we're incurring at the moment are in order to advance the social mission of the organization, then that's essentially, as long as that's true, then that's essentially then should allay the fears of the board in terms of like, what's all of these costs, what are these costs for? And then it purely becomes a question of how do we feel financially about, reimbursing for these things, et cetera, given there's not much cash flow at the moment.
But I'm just entering the point to where I should be getting much more cash flow now that I've completed some things last year, so that should be improving. But I'm not. The board's good people, good friends, even family. and the things that came up, if none of us know, and that's the problem, is we don't know what it was supposed to be. So it raises many flags
Yeah.
with me. If I'm not supposed to pay for this stuff, then I don't want to do a nonprofit. It's not.
Of course.
I want to do what the right thing is to do by every
Yes,
in every
absolutely.
way. Yeah. So
Now, just to be clear, two things. If, for example, the nonprofit doesn't reimburse you for these costs, as far as I'm aware, you can claim that if you itemize your taxes ever, and even sometimes when you don't itemize taxes, you can claim those as personal business expenses, right? That weren't reimbursed by the nonprofit. So you can still use that as a business cost.
that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, you can't do both because then that's you can't do both because then that's double dipping. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking about.
But
With
like-
the December stuff, just
Yeah.
put that on my taxes like I did before I made it a nonprofit, and then starting January 1st, have everything be related to the nonprofit.
Yeah.
That sounds cleaner to me.
that's your call. Years back, for example, I flew to the Philippines to work on a website with a web developer there. I'll never get reimbursed for the $1,000 that cost me, but I decided I didn't want to ask that reimbursement because the organization didn't have the money. So I just used that as a business expense for my self-employment, aspect of my taxes.
So if I'm not receiving a salary from this, am I employed?
No. So that's where if you have any other income from something else, you could use it. Well, that's a tricky one, in fact, because your self-employment, it should also be related to the nature of the self-employment. It gets a little complicated there. If you get any income from the nonprofit, but you're not on payroll, then you're a contractor. But the reality is that, and you could swing being a contractor at the early point. Why? Because you're not taking your marching orders from anyone yet at the organization. The board's not telling you what to do and how to do it and when to do it. However, the second this goes on a little longer than a few months, it moves into the realm of being regular work. And at that point, you should be an employee. So you can be reimbursed as a volunteer. So essentially at the moment, you're a volunteer. And volunteers can be reimbursed for expenses that they have, including training, travel, etc. So I would see this fitting under that category at this point.
So should I take like $10 a workshop or something and be an employee, or?
You mean in terms of you run a workshop and should you take a salary of like a small amount?
Yeah.
I think until you get enough cash, like to me, your number one priority for you is to get reimbursed for your expenses. You can do that as the volunteer. And so the costs of setting up payroll and running payroll are not worth it in terms of what you lose as a percentage.
But you said that would only last for a little while? Did you say that?
No. That's if you're a contractor.
Oh, okay.
But the fact is, so my strong recommendation to you would be just be a volunteer for the first 3 or 4 months until the organization has maybe enough money that it could pay a small, salary, just a few hours a week, let's say. And up until that point, use any of the income, if approved by the board, to reimburse you for your expenses. That way, a reimbursement you don't pay taxes on.
Right.
Salary you pay taxes on.
Right. That's my motivation too. Okay, so another thing, I still have not received my number. I guess because of the freeze, I still have not received my 50. And when I've called to find out about it, it said, they're not taking calls right now, kind of. So I guess now the freeze is over.
Yeah, you might have just missed. Yeah, what if they've just hit that point where they would have processed it in the next few days and then the freeze started.
Yeah.
So, it'll come.
Okay. And you said that would probably come via email. I was wondering, gosh, did it come via email?
No, it comes via mail.
Oh, by mail.
No,
okay.
it comes via mail.
Okay, then it hasn't been lost. Okay, good. That's good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
let me make sure I'm understanding this right.
There's one.
Huh? Okay, so
Oh, there's one more thing.
there's one more thing?
I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, one more thing. The only other thing is that if you ever got audited, and it's very, 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 very unlikely, especially in these times with such limited funding for the IRS, for a small nonprofit to be audited. If you did, it could look a little strange if 90% of the budget for the year, let's say you run your year from January through to December, if 90% of your budget this year went to training, like professional development costs, that would look a little strange. So if you've got some big, and that could even be retrospective development, professional development costs, paying some things from last year. So if you have the ability, what I would do is make sure that you've got a range of activities of which your expenses are for. Like you said, materials, things like that, because it'll just look a little cleaner, even if it doesn't change the truth of it all. It'll look cleaner and be less suspicious for anyone that's external overseeing finances to look at something and see, oh, there's a range of things that this company spends its money on versus, oh my God, it's spending it all on education and training. And who's doing that? Oh, it's the executive director. Wow, that's a lot of professional development for a startup organization to have. So that would be my only other thought, just to really think.
I've got it broken down into months because actually I pay by the month for both of the big trainings that I'm doing, and I see it as easily more than covered by income, and so I don't think that's going to be a problem. So I think what I'll do is if I just have that December, because it was such an expensive month with the trip and I'll just have December. I'll just ask for the nonprofit filing stuff and then start in January. That just seems cleaner and yeah.
Well, I wouldn't shortchange yourself, Kathy. I would more enter into a conversation with your board.
Okay.
Explain to to me, it shouldn't even be a decision that you make alone. You want a board to have this conversation with you and say, hey, look, let's get to really understand it. My guess is that there's a lot of misunderstanding or lack of understanding. And the more you can have that conversation with them, I think even if they end up agreeing with you that, yeah, don't claim the December stuff, it'll be coming from a space of shared understanding, which will feel, I think, a lot better, so that they'll know, great, we're not reimbursing that, but Kathy put down, $500 of her own money or whatever it is. Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for making that contribution to essentially training that is driving this nonprofit. It's worth it. If it really is training that is taking for the organization, then it deserves to be acknowledged, whether it's reimbursed or not.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's all.
We've got just a couple of minutes. So, do you want to check your list of what you've got to move forward here, so you can check you're clear on how to proceed?
Uh-huh. Okay. So my understanding is that I should come up with a budget, which that was what the board asked for last time. Come up with a budget for every quarter for about 3 months, and the budget should include not just the training, but also the hall rentals and all the expenses from doing the workshops and advertising and marketing. And it's okay. Yeah.
It should be an annual, just to clarify, it should be an annual budget split up by quarter.
Okay.
Yes. A 2019 budget split up by a budget for 2019.
Oh, okay.
Split up by each quarter: first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter.
Uh-huh.
And it should include income items and expenditure items separately.
Now, since this is the first year. I'm just doing like a wild guess.
Yeah. That's why the initial budget is an invitation for a conversation.
Okay. Okay. And so if my wild guess turns out to be way off the next meeting, do we redo the budget or what happens? It's okay.
Yeah. So what happens, you usually, if you can move quickly, what happens is you'll have an approval at the first meeting of the budget in principle. And then each quarter, if you meet or if you meet monthly, you'll just usually get every quarter, you'll agree to review the budget and you'll just say, hey, is that realistic? Or what happened in the last quarter? Or actually, it turned out we didn't get that grant or whatever. Okay, what do we need to adjust in the budget? You see, they're just doing their role of ensuring that the organization, A, doesn't go bankrupt, and B, is operating for the public benefit.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and we haven't even, I want to do the coaching with that person that knows about where to find the grants. Well, one of the persons on the board, she did find some grants, but they were already due. They said we couldn't do those. I guess January is a grant month. We missed.
You want to put, yeah.
So we can't really put grant stuff in our budget because we're just clueless. But I guess I could make a guess that we'll get some.
Well, I think the trick probably is to have somebody on your board who've got some experience, like bring someone in who's got a little bit of experience, build some start going to some events. I mean, if you can get a scholarship for the Oregon Nonprofit Leaders Conference, that's happening in Ashland in April, there are sessions all about grant writing. You can meet the funders there. So all of the big grant giving organizations have a session where you come and you sit at a table with them and you get to talk with the actual CEOs of the grants. Mm-hmm. So that's where I would suggest starting, is to understand the field by connecting in with it at events. It's the cheapest way, it's the quickest way, and you can often get a full scholarship to that conference. So, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah. And it's local too, so that's cool. Okay, so we'll put our grant focus on that. Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Donnie. You've been a huge help, and like I said, the board's not adverse at all. We were all just like, none of us, me included, know shit about this, and oh my God, what do we do? So you've cleared things up.
Yeah, and that's where, I would strongly encourage you, people on your board who've got board experience. It's always helpful to have a few people like that.
Well, even I have board experience. I've been the president of a board, but I never put together all the pieces. And it was a machine that was rolling along, and I just facilitated the meetings and
right. Yeah.
So this is so different than doing that.
All new world.
Uh-huh.
Yep. All right. Well, good luck, Kathy. I'll send you through an invoice. I'll just send it through to your email address, the educational one.
Okay.
And you can send through a check via mail, or you can pay via PayPal.
Yeah, PayPal works.
Yeah, perfect. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Donnie.
All right. Thanks, Kathy.
I responded to the offers and needs market. I'll be there. Can we do a pitch? Can I do a pitch there? Are you going to do that again, or how's that going to work? Are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I can.
You'll just have the chance to be, pitching just in the small groups as part of the offers and needs. So you can do your pitches in that group. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's what I'll plan on.
All right.
Thank you, Donnie.
Thanks, Kathy. Have a good day. Yes.